Hello and welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, we're going to be looking at premium player drafts to get stuck into and maybe for you guys to use as a bit of a template for your own drafting ahead of game week 1. Shout out first and foremost to the member of the community that suggested this, which is Jedi Stew. You asked for this video to help you with your drafting, so I hope it does, sir. And of course, everybody else that watches, I hope this helped you out. If it does, then of course, hit that thumbs up button below. Really want to try and get 50 likes on a video if possible, guys, so please try and help me get there. Let's have a look at the overview of the video and how we're going to be deep diving into these drafts then. So I've got 4 to showcase with you today. They need to consist of at least 2 or more premium price players to be considered a premium draft, in my opinion. Not all of the drafts do contain specific player options or suggestions. It's kind of the way I've tried to make it out is that it's a fill in the blanks approach for you guys. So yes, there is lots of debate for different personnel at different price points to be had, and I want to try and avoid that in this video. This is all about price point coverage and maybe a key kind of spine that you'll start seeing across multiple drafts of who I think are key players we need to make sure we've got in the draft. So don't want to use the word essential because, as we always know, there's no essential in FPL, but I do think there are some core players that we need to go into with game week 1. So let's have a look at the first draft then. It does include Trent, Salah and Haaland. Now, I've opted for a 4-4-2 as I really don't see how else to go with these particular individuals. I think 4-4-2 offers the most flexibility, spreads the funds reasonably well across all the positions, and I think some key price points are covered across all of these areas. So very good draft overall, I think. Offers a lot of flexibility. So let's start with Trent. Of course, £8 million. He can be downgraded all the way down. And of course, you can then upgrade your midfielder or your striker slot to of course, change the formation. But you need 2 moves at least to do that. So at least by game week 3, if you've not enjoyed owning him through the Chelsea and the Bournemouth match, then I think that it's okay. It's okay to concede the loss there and then just make that move onward. So I don't mind starting with him at all because it does offer you the flexibility of downgrading to then change. It's a bit more tricky, I think, for individuals that don't start with him to try and upgrade, right? So I like that point of view. You then have Gabriel and Estepinian as 5 million defenders there that I think in terms of that price point, they are the most exciting for game week 1 to own. Very good fixtures in the opening 3. Estepinian, then it has a little bit trickier run from game week 4. So maybe you move him on to someone like a Pedro Porro, for example, and Spurs showcase maybe a little bit of defensive capability. And then, of course, as well, his attacking output as well is not to be anything to be sniffed at. So maybe that's a nice move that you can do. But other than that, really, I don't see any other 5 million defenders that excite me. You could say Gabriel could be Zinchenko or Saliba, but again, I want to try and avoid player-specific debate. So for me, these are my favourites. Aigner is an interesting choice at 5 million as well, because I've just literally spoken to death about the 4.5 million goalkeeper slot being the kind of the optimal play. Don't spend any more money than that in your goalkeeper. But this particular draft allows us to, in my opinion, stretch to that 5 million keeper. And Aigner offers, in my opinion, what looks to be a lot of good value. He's got assist threat, absolutely. He's great with the ball at his feet. I think he's going to offer save potential as well. And of course, he covers the all-important clean sheets for maybe somebody like Luke Shaw that's priced 0.5 million more expensive. So, I don't want to compare the two. That's not what I'm saying. But absolutely, the extra 0.5 million saving is definitely something worth considering. The 5.5 million defender then is left blank purely for your own speculation. I think Stones and Chilwell are probably the 2 standouts for me. That being said, though, Luke Shaw could be an option if you want to double up on United's defence. I would personally wouldn't go that route. And then, of course, we have Reece James as well at that price point, who maybe is a bit more of a fitness and injury doubt longer term over Ben Chilwell. So I like Chilwell or Stones in that slot. We then have a 6.5 million midfielder slot. Again, I think that's very subjective. We've got the likes of Diaby coming through, Aston Villa looking very sharp. Of course, you have Mudryk of Chelsea. We have lots of options at Brighton. We've got Gross, March, Mitoma. So plenty of different options there. And of course, Brian and Burmo as well, who's part of the template for the most part. So plenty of options. We then have Saka at 8.5 million. I think he's almost a non-negotiable for me at this stage. Had a very strong pre-season so far, and I think he's been underpriced by FPL. I think he should be at least 9 million. So I think we can take advantage of that, especially in those early fixtures. The 7.5 million midfielder slot definitely could potentially be a 7 million mid as well, now that Bowen and Richarlison have both had relatively good pre-seasons, and Richarlison may actually be an out of position midfielder if Harry Kane does make his move to Bayern Munich. So definitely something to consider. And if you do want that 0.5 million flexibility later on for anything, you could easily downgrade that 7.5 million midfielder to a Bowen or a Richarlison. Then we've got, of course, Salah, 12.5 million, and Haaland at 14 million, making up our two premiums. Salah, of course, being a fantastic differential captain in game week 2 by the looks of things. Most people probably going to set and forget on Haaland for at least the first 5-6 weeks. So definitely could give you some kind of catapult up the ranks early on. So I do like owning him. And then, of course, João Pedro is that kind of budget option that maybe is a bit more controversial out of all of these selections. I just think that price point is not particularly strong. However, João Pedro, if he does get into the starting 11 of Brighton, playing in that number 10 or number 9 role, I think he could offer a lot of value there. He's 1 million cheaper than, of course, the Brighton midfielders, and he potentially is on penalties. He's taken one in pre-season. Pascal Gross was not on the pitch though, so maybe he doesn't take them over him, but something to consider. And I really like the look of him, so something to keep an eye on for this particular draft for sure. Of course, then we move into a Trentless draft now, just showcasing what you can do with a 3-5-2 formation. You essentially upgrade your 4.5 million midfielder to another 6.5 million mid, and you upgrade your 5.5 million striker up to a 7.5 million forward. That's kind of what you do with the 4 or the 3.5 million extra. I have had to sacrifice Onana to a 4.5 million goalkeeper also to enable the funds across those positions. But as you can see, for the most part, it's pretty up to you. I mean, I have put Matoma in here because I do like having a Brighton attacker. I think at least one of them across those opening fixtures. So because we don't have João Pedro here, I have put Matoma in there, but he could easily be March or Gross if you think he's going to play a more advanced role. We then do have a secondary 6.5 million mid that's up to you guys. The 7.5 million mid, as mentioned previously, could easily be a 7 million mid, and you could put that money back into the goalkeeper if you really wanted Onana. But I really do like this 3-5-2 formation. I think the 7.5 million forward of Nkunku, Gakpo or Darwin probably offers a little bit more flexibility than opting with just a Trent and a João Pedro, if that makes sense. I think this covers a lot more individuals in terms of single moves. We can make a move from one 6.5 million mid to another 6.5 million mid with relative ease, whereas Trent and sort of then being sold and downgraded and somebody else being upgraded needs at least 2. So kind of offers us a little bit more of a single route to certain players that may come to the forefront. So I really do like this draft, and of course it does still have the Egyptian King in for game week 2. Then, of course, we have a draft inclusive of the 9 million price point. A really key area for me, I think. I've got Marcus Rashford in my team at the moment, but it equally could be Heung-min Son. I think it'll be an interesting topic, or it'll be interesting to see in the first few weeks without Harry Kane, if that's how things shape out, how Son produces anything or what he does and where he positions himself. Because if it looks like he's, kind of on fire or becomes a bit more of the talisman option for Spurs, then potentially I see him fitting into a draft like this. If you do have Mohamed Salah, I think that he could easily get in there above Marcus Rashford. I don't think he's essential to own by any means. I just prefer the opening fixtures for Man United over Son. Of course, the downside to this draft, it does have 0.5 million in the bank, which is an upside, but it does have a downside of the 4.5 million defender having to be played week in, week out. You could argue that where you've got the likes of maybe Nakamba as a 4.5 million midfielder for Luton, he could potentially be a rotationable option with that defender. So if you can find a nice pairing between Luton and maybe another club, that potentially could work. But you can see how stretched you have to get once you start including a little bit more of that half premium slot of Son or Rashford into the team. So overall, I really do like this draft, but it's just like I say, maybe a few too much sacrifice across the defensive line for my liking. And then finally, I think this is more to showcase really what I think is going to be an impossible draft for game week 1, and that is a 2.5 premium with KDB. I think, we've just seen how difficult it is to fit the 9 million midfielder in. This is with a 10.5 million. Now, we've already used the 0.5 in the bank, and then we've had to find an additional 1 million to facilitate KDB at 10.5. The only way I could see it working is taking it out of the 5.5 million defender and downgrading them to a second 4.5 million defensive option. And I think to be honest, I'm already uncomfortable with the previous draft having to play a 4.5 million defender most weeks or rotating them with a 4.5 million midfielder, let alone having two of them in the draft. So I think KDB isn't an option alongside Mohamed Salah after putting this together. I think it's a KDB or Salah situation. You must have one or the other. Having them side by side, I think, offers a very limited amount of money for the rest of your squad and really just makes it too weak across the board. So I think it's going to be a KDB instead of Salah situation if he ever comes to the forefront of our thinking later on in the season. But as for game week 1, I think he's an absolute avoid for me, and you would only ever be able to get a maximum of kind of that 2.5 premium with a 9 million midfielder into game week 1. So that's going to wrap up the 4 premium drafts, guys. Let me know in the comments below if this was useful. As mentioned, it really was just about kind of price point coverage rather than specific personnel. I will be putting out another updated draft for sure before game week 1 on my own thinking with a bit more detail in each of the personnel if you're interested in content like that. That will be coming soon, so please do consider subscribing below if you do want to keep up to date with that content. And of course, finally, if you did enjoy the content, guys, smash that like button for me below. Let's get 50 likes on this video to help the channel growth. And thank you very much for watching, guys. Take care and see you in the next one.